I want to welcome you to the meeting of the Spending Affordability Committee. It's nice to see some old friends and some new faces this year. This committee has a very important role in the budget process for Howard County because the county executive looks to this committee, and so does the county council, to set, I guess the best word is guidelines on what the county can afford to spend. It's not the job of this committee to tell people how to spend their money or where to spend their money, but rather to give them, to be sort of a guidepost on, these are, given the functions of the economy and the limits of our revenues, this is what we're likely to generate, and this is what our reasonable spending guidelines, and these are the expenditure challenges that face the county as it goes forward. Bond rating agencies look to spending affordability committees as an important function in what they call effective management of long-term debt. So this committee does have an important role. This morning I'm going to give you an initial overview of some of the issues we face, and we can discuss the things that we feel we need to discuss as the committee goes forward. Hopefully we can do this in 4 or 5 sessions, meeting at 7:30 on Thursdays, and be finished by early February. We're required to submit our report to the county executive by the 1st of March, so that gives us some time to work on drafts. So why don't we start by going around the room, introducing yourself and a little bit about who you are. So again, I'm Ray Wacks, I'm the county's budget director. Yep.
I'm Gail Benson, Howard County Budget Office.
Brooke Mam with the Howard County Budget Office.
Becky or Rebecca Kidwell. I'm in Public Works. I'm the Capital Budget Manager.
My name is Doug Siglin. I'm new to the committee. I live out in southwest Howard County, and I'm a consultant to a lot of localities and municipalities in the Chesapeake watershed on stormwater issues, on water quality issues.
Hello, my name is Jimmy Plot. I'm also new to the committee. I live 5 minutes away down the street. I work for the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives as the Director of Ethnic Commissions.
Welcome.
My name is Jeff Brown. I work in the Department of Planning and Zoning here in Howard County. Into the research division. I'm Richard Finch. I'm an economist with Petition Appeals with the University of Baltimore. I'm on the committee with the Howard County resident now, so consultant provide personal income forecast to the committee.
Good morning, I'm Clarence Sam. I'm a physician at Johns Hopkins. I specialize in preventive medicine. I am a resident of Columbia. This is my 3rd year, I think.
Good morning, my name is Lonnie Robbins. I'm the county's Chief Administrative Officer.
I'm Lisa Gehrman in the County Auditor's Office. I'm representing Craig Montgomery.
And Lynn, there's a seat over here next to Mr. Clark. Room for you. No, we need you up front.
Well, I feel bad out here by myself.
Hi, I'm Nina Basu. I am new to the committee this year as well. I live in Columbia in Long Reach, and I'm a local attorney.
Hi, I'm Frank Aquino, I'm a member of the Howard County Board of Education. I'm a city resident, and I've been on the committee.
Hi there, Camille Jones. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Howard County Public School System. This is my 1st year at the committee.
I'm Stan Mark Gillespie, Director of Finance for the county, and timely arrived.
I'm Camilla Carroll, and I have no occupation right now at all, except this.
I want your job.
Steve Pointot, I am an Elkridge resident and Senior Vice President of Power Bank.
Alan Cornell. I live in Glenwood, new to the committee with Penny on Michael, commercial real estate, industrial development.
I'm Ryan Frederick. I'm the CEO of Applied Defense Solutions. We're a 50-person engineering firm in Columbia. I live in Howard County, in Glenwood. And we do, my background's not financial. I'm an engineer with my spacecraft. 1st year.
That's cool.
I'm Christina Delmont Small. I'm president of the PTA Council of Howard County, and we represent all 73 PTAs and roughly 25,000 PTA members in Howard County.
Okay.
And I'm Liz Coleman. I'm the Vice President of Administration of Finance at Howard Community College.
Good morning, everybody. So let's take a look and see what we have here. Here's what we'd like to do today, is to discuss what our charge is, what exactly is spending affordability, what measures does Howard County use to measure its spending affordability? And what are we going to review? What do you want to review? What do you think are the important factors that we need to take a look at? And then hopefully, I told her to come about 8 o'clock, Renee Mertzak, who is the assessor for Howard County, head of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation Office, is going to come in and discuss the recent assessment that has just been completed in Howard County, what that means in terms of long-term property trends, how they go about doing the assessments, what's happening to housing prices. And then we have some preliminary work in that, based on the information that the state has given us, we have some projections of assessable base. I want to show you what it looks like right now and what some of the long-term trends have been. And we want to talk about scheduling our meetings and what we want to handle at those meetings. And so before we get started in that, does anybody have any questions or comments or any points they'd like to bring up? Things that concern them? Again, as we go through this process, if issues arise that are of concern to you, please feel free to bring them forward. Last year, some issues came up during the course of the meetings, and we were able to change some of our meeting schedules to accommodate the questions and concerns that committee members had. Obviously, last year a big issue was pensions, and that was a big issue. So let's get started. So here is the charge of the committee. One thing I should tell you is I sent you an email last night about the Dropbox that I've set up. That's I guess we're moving into the 20th century now when it comes to technology. So rather than emailing you all items, I've set up this Dropbox which you can access. And I'm going to post there all of the documents that we use in the committee. Also, we're making a videotape this year, so if you miss a meeting or you want to go back and check something, I'm going to post the videos of these meetings. Hopefully it's working.
It's still working.
It's still working. New technology for us. And you'll be able to see it on the Dropbox. And you don't deal, because of the Dropbox, we don't have to deal with any limitations on the size of files when you email things back and forth. And so we found this to be an effective way to share information. But again, what I've put there so far is the address list, the executive order that established the committee, and last year's report. And I'll put this morning this presentation on the site, and I'll also put the tape or the file that is the recording of this meeting. So this is the detail from what the county executive has asked us to do. Review in detail the status and projections of revenues and expenditures of the county, not only for fiscal year 2015, which starts July 1 and goes through next June 30th, but also look out 5 years, 2016 through, it's hard to say, 2020. Time's flying. Really look at what's happening with those revenues and what do we think is going to happen with those revenues in the long term. You know, I think we've all learned over the past 10 or 15 years that the economy and our revenues have been driven by what I call bubbles, which are big surges in revenue followed by drops and collapses. What are we in one now? Are we coming out of one now? And how long is it sustainable? And are the current levels sustainable in the long term as we look at our revenue growth? And what do we think are reasonable projections going forward? We're going to depend on Dr. Clinch over here to help us with that. Richard's going to do his analysis of the Howard County economy and also give us projections of personal income, which we're going to see really do drive income tax, which is one of our major revenues. And I'll spend a little time today talking about what our revenue structure looks like. And then evaluate expenditure levels with consideration of the long-term obligations facing the county. And I'll get into this in a few minutes. We have certain measures that limit how much bonds we can afford to issue in the budget each year and still remain affordable. There's a lot of misconception about our capital budget. Let me give you a couple of basic terms to start out with. The county has two budgets, really, an operating budget and a capital budget. The operating budget covers the day-to-day costs of operating the county, paying the salaries of the teachers, the police officers, the librarians, the public works workers, and the capital budget builds things, builds schools, renovates schools, builds libraries, all those things as we go forward. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about how that's funded and where the money comes from. The primary source for funding the capital budget are bonds. The county sells long-term bonds. We sell 20-year bonds. We have a AAA rated, we're AAA rated by all three major rating agencies, which is the highest possible rating. Good morning, Renee. I'm glad to see you. Thank you. So someone, every couple of years, a member of the council asks me, well, if I cut this project out of the budget this year, how much can we save in the tax rate? And the answer is, in the short term, nothing. Because the way bonds work, we sell, and we let finance talk about this more in detail, we sell bonds in arrears. We have enough cash flow so that bonds are authorized in the budget. Let's say $20 million share of an elementary school construction, which is about what it costs these days. $20 million for us, $20 million for the state. We go ahead and we spend that money, they monitor that money. When it's about once a year, we go to the bond market and sell bonds, and then you have to pay what's known as debt service, which is really similar to your mortgage payment. And that debt service doesn't show, because of the way the process works, the debt service doesn't show up for a couple of years. So for example, in the 2015 budget, we will authorize bonds. It's not likely that we're going to have to pay debt service on those bonds until fiscal year 2017, 2 years after the fact that the bonds were initially authorized. So there's a lag. And because it has no short-term impact, sometimes people don't feel the need to be careful about how many bonds are authorized in the budget because they don't have to pay for them a couple of years from now. And our job is to give a little discipline to the process to say, yeah, you can issue bonds, but you have to understand what your limits are and what the impact is going to be on your operating budget. The analogy I use is mortgage poor. It's a cliche in Howard County that there are many people who have very nice homes, but they don't have enough money to buy furniture for those homes because they're putting so much of their payment into their mortgage. That's the thing we have to be concerned about. As we issue these bonds, are we going to have enough money to pay the debt service on all of these bonds and still have enough money to pay the salaries of our workers and the cost of all the salt that we've been putting on the road the last couple of weeks and all the other things that we need to do to operate county government? So what they're asking us to do is come up with projections for the upcoming fiscal year, a new level of debt authorization, and what the impact of that is on the long-term outlook of the county, and the anticipated outlook on what we're going to have on future budgets, and other findings and recommendations, which is really kind of an open book for us. What is the long-term implications of what we're doing right now? What are the long-term implications to meet, for example, our stormwater mandates? What are the long-term implications on our pension costs and health insurance costs? What are the long-term implications if we start new programs? These are all the issues, I think, that we have to wrestle with. Not that we say that these are good or bad, but I think if we know that they're out there, we have to recognize what they are and what the challenges are and what the likely costs are going to be, and given those likely costs, how does that fit into our long-term financial plan? So again, I sort of listed here some of the questions that I think we need to take a look at. What is the outlook for our economy, both short and long-term? And as I think you'll see, what we're really driven by are two major revenues, which is our local property tax and our local income tax. They make up close to 90% of our general fund revenues. And all the other little charges and fees and other little minor revenues make up about 10%. So what really happens here is driven by property and income tax. And let me just define terms again. The government accounting uses this concept of fund accounting, in which they segregate various expenditures into little pockets called funds. The general fund is the largest fund of the county, and again, it's non-specific in terms of where the money is spent, and it doesn't have legal requirements on how the money can be spent. And in there, and our general fund budget is approaching $1 billion right now. In there are the funding for education, the funding for libraries, the funding for police. Then we have a whole series of other funds, the fire tax fund, the water and sewer fund. We have a whole series of special revenue funds where the revenue coming from that fund is dedicated by law to that purpose and is limited to it. For example, we have a trash fee in Howard County. but we've also set up a trash fee fund so that the funds are also only used for that purpose, not anything else. So if you pay a trash fee, you know it's going to pay for the cost of collection and disposal of trash. We've also set up in the past year a stormwater fund, which collects the stormwater fee and limits its use and segregates its use to just that purpose. Where is the growth coming from? What is driving the growth, and where do we think it's going to be? Jeff Bronow is here from the Department of Planning and Zoning, and next week he'll be talking to us about the long-term development projections that the Department of Planning is using. And in addition, Kent Menser from our Military Liaison Office, or Fort Meade Liaison Office, is going to talk us about the long-term trends for NSA and Fort Meade, which we are learning is one of the primary drivers of our local economy. And then, what are sustainable levels of spending for us for both education, public safety, employee benefits costs, which I think Board of Education, we are learning, is driving a large part of our expenditures going forward, both pension costs, current employees' health costs, and retired employees' health costs are turning out to be major drivers of costs that are really beginning to dominate our budget. Infrastructure costs. What is it going to cost us to maintain all these buildings? We've just renovated this building after 30 years, 35 years or so. Are we putting enough funds available to make sure that the very good infrastructure we have right now stays at its level that it needs to be? Stormwater. And there's other things I'm sure that you can come up with. And again, let me say feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question or a concern. And if you have something that you feel needs to be addressed, please feel free to bring it up, and we'll be glad to try to address it and adjust our schedule to handle your issue. And again, what is a sustainable level of funding in our capital budget? What can we afford in new bonds? And I will tell you that last year, to give you some level of that, the committee recommended $120 million of new bond authorization as a reasonable level of growth for new bonds that the county could afford over time and still keep its debt service, which is the payment of those bonds, at a reasonable level. So here's what our general fund looks like. And again, and what I've done here is I've taken out the one-time money that we had in the budget, the surplus that we carried over from previous years. So we're looking at current revenue. And again, it was about $930 million is our general fund budget. And I think you can see about half of it comes from property tax, half of it comes from income tax, other local taxes, which are primarily the recordation tax, the admissions and amusement tax. Those major taxes make up about 3%, and all the fees and charges and licenses and permits and fines and other minor revenues we collect make up only about 7% of our general fund. So, as I said earlier, what happens to property and what happens to income tax really drives our budget. Our recordation tax can double, which is very nice, but it's not going to have a major impact on the ability of the county to spend money because we're only collecting about $20 million a year in recordation tax. A little less than that, isn't that right, Don?
Yes.
Okay.
Ray?
Yeah.
I assume the new stormwater tax is in the brown wedge?
Well, actually, that's a special fund, so that's not in there.
It's not in there.
That's because this is just the general fund. Okay. And that special fund, it's generating this year about $10.5 million in revenue. And we'll spend some time talking about stormwater. Now, I put this together to show you where the growth came from in last year's budget. And last year's budget increased, the general fund from current revenues increased by about $46 million. And of that budget, about 64% of it came from the income tax. And we'll spend some time talking about why that's so. Property tax growth made up about 23% of our growth. The other local taxes, which was primarily recordation tax, made up about 7%. And then all of the other little fees and charges made up about 6%. Now, I think it's pretty clear that we're in a recovery right now. You'll see as I go through some of these numbers that assessments really have struggled over the past couple of years, and housing prices have really struggled over the years. Maybe that's starting to recover. Income tax has also really struggled over the year. We hit a peak in income tax in 2007, 2008. We had a dramatic slowing of growth. We had a drop in personal income, and now we're in a period of recovery. And again, we'll spend some time talking about this, but it's pretty clear that capital gains in a wealthy county like Howard County is a major force of our revenues, and the stock market is doing very well right now, and our residents are generating capital gains, and that's driving a substantial portion of our revenue growth right now. The income tax is growing faster than our personal income, and so what are the long-term implications for us as we look forward? Can we assume we're going to get this kind of growth going in the future, or are we, as I'm starting to suspect, in another bubble? You know, our economy has been driven by bubbles. We had, at the end of the last century, we had the high-tech bubble in the stock market. That collapsed, and if you were here in 2003 or 2004, you know we struggled. And then we entered into this real estate bubble, which started about 2004 and lasted to 2008. And now perhaps we're in another little capital gains bubble right now, which is driving our income tax. But you can see that income tax really did drive a substantial portion of our growth last year. So I guess the question is where does this money go? And this is the general fund. And you can see that education, which includes, by the way, the Board of Education, the community college, the Howard County Library, and the debt service associated with both the college and the library, makes up almost 2/3 of our general fund. Public safety, which is primarily police, because fire's in a separate fund, makes up about 12%. Public facilities, which is primarily the Department of Public Works, which is responsible for maintaining these buildings, maintaining the roads and bridges, plowing the roads, and collecting the garbage, makes up about that. And everything else, including our general government functions, our human service functions, our health department, make up about 17% of the budget. So, and the 17%, by the way, includes debt service, which is probably close to 10%. So, you can, yes, ma'am.
Quick question, why is the debt service for the library and the community college and education as opposed to the other debt services?
Because the state law requires that we show it as part, and it's a true, when we want to show the true cost of education to the county, it's important that we recognize that again, building schools has an impact on our operating budget. And I think that, that raises an interesting point, because when you want to allocate how much money are you going to give to schools, if you don't pay attention to the cost of paying for all these great schools that we've built as a cost of education and just look at the operating cost, you're really understating what our true effort in education is. So it's an attempt to really show what our education effort is. Yes, sir?
A notional idea how much of that education is debt service?
Yeah, I think the education on schools and colleges is about $45 million a year, which makes up so if that's roughly $640 million, $600 million, it's about 10%. I've broken this down a little way. These numbers are a little bit of an estimate because it's hard to get it. But when you look at all of our budgets, the county budgets, the school budgets, the Board of Education budgets, the health department budgets, some of which are direct employees of the county and some of which are not, almost 70% of our budget, and it's a growing number probably, go to pay for the salaries and benefits of our employees. So you can see we're really a people agency. For all of the equipment and all of the supplies we have, it's really not about that, it's really about the people. And how much we pay the people and how much the cost of those people are.
This is still general fund.
No, this is pretty much across all.
Everything.
This is everything. This is an attempt to say, of everything that we spend, when you look at all the money that the county spends in its general fund, in its special funds, in the money that the Board of Education receives from the state, it's about $1.5 billion. So here are the measures that we have been using the past couple of years to measure our debt and look at what it is. So the first one is a charter limit, and it says that the county's full debt can't be more than 12% of our assessable base. However, since that thing was put in place, or that requirement was put in place, the county changed, or the state changed the way it measured the assessable base. It used to measure the full cash value of a property and then discount it to some other level. About 10 years ago, they started using 100% cash value as the assessable base, which means that the tax rate we were using at the time, if we hadn't changed it, would have been grossly overstated. So we went to 100% assessment, and when you apply that same level, the county debt should not exceed 4.8% of its full assessment.
Define full assessment.
Well, I'm going to let Renee answer that question when she comes up,
Okay.
but it's the job of the county assessor to look at all the properties in the county once every 3 years and place a value on it which is as close as possible and reasonable to what they determine to be the full cash value. Now, I will tell you, and I'm stealing some of Renee's thunder, that residential property, the homes we live in, are assessed based on the sale value, and the commercial properties, such as apartments and office buildings, are assessed based on the cash and income that they derive from the property. So, for example, a fully occupied office building is going to have a higher assessment than one that is 50% vacant.
So by definition, it's the assessed value of all real property in Howard County.
Real and personal property.
Real and personal.
And personal property is a relatively small component of it, but it's the value of the contents of businesses, their inventory. Debt measured against the population on a per capita basis. This kind of puts us at a disadvantage because we have a relatively high debt compared to our neighbors, but we also have relatively high wealth compared to our neighbors. So debt per capita, to me, is kind of it's an interesting figure, but it's kind of irrelevant. We feel that number 3 is more important. That is debt per capita measured as a percent of the jurisdiction's per capita personal income, which takes that per capita debt and measures it against wealth, which I think is a fair measure of what our real debt burden is in the county. And then the last one, which is probably the most important, is debt service as a percent of current revenues, with a goal to try to keep it at about 10%, or there about 10%. So that 10% of our current revenue, and if our current revenue this past year was $930 million, we'd want our debt service to be about $93 million a year, roughly. Yes.
How much, when you're talking about current revenue now, are you including state and federal funds in that as well?
No, just the county-derived revenue, because, once again, those state revenues can't be used for debt service. They can only be, the largest piece of revenue goes to the school system and can only be used for operating expenses. It can't be used to pay debt. So that's why that figure is that way. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or anything they wanted to add or concerns they wanted to bring forward? Okay. So just for your information, yes, sir.
Yeah, actually I do. When the rating agencies think about this, which of those measures do they give the most attention to?
They have a complex rating system that uses not just these measures, but they look at the underlying economy of the county, they look at the reserves and our fund balance, they look at what they call the management efficiency of the county, how effectively is the county being managed. And it's not just people like me that they look to elected officials. Are the elected officials willing to make the tough decisions to keep the county whole? You know, are they willing to raise taxes when they need to raise taxes? Are they willing to cut expenditures when they need to be cut? And are they maintaining the infrastructure in a way that's going to ensure the long-term viability of the county? So it's a complex process. I would say they look at all of these. They've called our debt burden moderate, given the factors that they look at. And if you'd like, we can bring you some more information about how the bond rating agencies do that. And Nikki Hogue, our debt manager, is here. And maybe if I could ask you to send me the latest evaluations from the three major rating agencies. I'll publish them in our Dropbox so you can take a look at them. Okay. So what's different pretty much is that many of our other counties use a limit on personal income to determine what their debt ought to be. For instance, Anne Arundel County wants to keep its growth in its operating budget not to exceed its growth in personal income, and its outstanding debt not to exceed 3% of its personal income. The latest number I have was FY11, I should update it. Howard County's debt was above that limit, it was at 3.9%. But again, personal income has grown pretty dramatically since then. Baltimore County uses some of the same kind of measures. And the state of Maryland has just issued its spending affordability report, and I can get a copy of that and put that in the Dropbox too. That was a little bit of a controversial number this year because some members of the administration this is done by the General Assembly. Some members were saying that the limit was being set too high, and others said it should have been set lower. But politics is everything at the state right now. So I'm going to call Renee up here. Renee is the county assessor, Renee Mertzak, to talk about the assessment of the county, the process that she just went through. But what this map is right here is a map of Howard County showing the 3 assessment areas of the county. So Renee, I'll let you explain how that works.
My assistant supervisors.
Sure, come on up.
Okay, this is the yellow area.
Why don't you wait a minute? When I get you on film.
Stand on the yellow table.
Okay, the yellow area is the area that we reassessed this past year. And it's districts 4, 5, and 6. 4 is the highly rural area up here. This is the 5th district in here, and this is the 6th district, mostly Laurel and
I don't think people understand those old districts anymore. They used to correspond to the old fire tax districts when we had 6 fire tax districts in the county. We now have a single fire tax district in the county. So those are kind of becoming an obsolete term.
Right. But the yellow area is the area that we just reassessed. After about, I would say, about 3 or 4 reassessment cycles of decreasing values, last year was the first year we just saw a very slight increase in our assessed values. Howard County and Montgomery counties were the only counties statewide that saw any increase last year. And this year we continued that. Overall we had about an 8% increase in our property values. And that was a result of about 6% residentially and about almost 18% commercially. So the commercial market is doing much better. The commercial market didn't take as big a hit as the residential market did because basically the problem with the commercial market was there was a lot of growth, and then the market sort of had to catch up with a lot of vacancies because there was a lot of overbuilding of office buildings and flex buildings and everything around the county. So it took a while for that to catch up, and then there was there wasn't a lot of money available for a while, and then to purchase property, so there really wasn't any markets. We didn't really have a sales market. But now the commercial market has been picking up. I think last year that went up about 12%. Now this year it's up about 18%. So that's on an upswing.
One thing that's important to remember, first of all, I'd like to point out that the yellow area that was reassessed this year also, for some strange reason, includes the out parcels of Columbia, which is why you see all those little splotches in the middle of Columbia, yellow splotches in the middle of Columbia. This was set up almost 20 years ago, and the idea was to try to get approximately the same number of accounts in each area. Because the rural area, even though it's so big, is so underpopulated, has relatively small numbers of property parcels, they added the out parcels as well. The other thing is that, remember, we have a triennial assessment system in this county, so any increase doesn't happen all at once. And so that 5% increase in commercial assessments isn't going to be applied next year. Only 1/3 of that 5% increase is going to be applied next year.
And also the homestead credits come into play. That's the credit that if your property increases by more than 5%, if the assessment increases by more than 5% in any given year, you only pay on that first 5% increase, and the rest you receive as a credit. Now, over the last several cycles, because we've been lowering values, a lot of these homestead credits have been wiped out. So people don't have the credits anymore, and as we start putting these increases into play, now the credits are going to kind of come back into play. Not in the major amounts, because some people were getting $100,000 worth of credits when we saw these huge increases in property values.
What do you mean by credit, ma'am? That they don't pay on that increase?
Right, they don't pay on the whole increase. What it is, okay, say your property goes up a certain amount, and we just calculate what you would pay, what your assessment would be if it only went up 5%. And the difference between what you would pay on the full assessment and that 5% increase is a credit. So then the following year, you're going to go up another 5%, and if your assessment stays the same, that credit will lessen. Now, if your assessment goes up, the credit will increase.
To put it in perspective, Howard County has a 5% cap. The cap can be set anywhere from 0 to 10%. It's 5% in Howard County, it's 10% in Montgomery County, it's 4% in Baltimore County and Baltimore City, 2% in Anne Arundel County. And so basically, if you want to put it in perspective, back in 2006, 2007, 2008, residential property was being, in some cases, assessed at more than 50% increase over its current value. And what that meant, but again, only a small part of that increase was applied in any one year. So what happened was, especially for people who had lived in their homes for a long time and had taken advantage of these credits, there opened a big gap between what I call their full cash value assessment and their taxable assessment, because their cash value was going up like this, but again, their taxable assessment could only grow by no more than 5% a year. And so a big gap opened up between what the full cash value listed on the books was and what we were taxing. And the difference of that was the homestead tax credit. And I call that the difference between our gross base and our net base. And I have a chart that I'm going to show you in a little while that shows you the impact of what that was. Yes, ma'am?
Just probably a ridiculous question, but when the property transfers, it automatically goes up to the higher level.
That's correct. That's correct.
You have to be in your property for at least one full fiscal year, from July 1st to June 30th, and then that will be your base value, and then that can't increase more than 5%. So if you move into a property in August, you have to wait almost 2 full years for that to go into effect. And seriously, during this big downturn that we had in assessed values, I mean, the county didn't really suffer that bad because people were still paying, even though their assessments were going down, they were still paying more in property taxes because they hadn't really.
Because
they were catching up to their full cash value assessment.
They're kind of coming back together.
Yeah.
So it's like the residential base is limited to a 5% increase every year.
That's correct.
On homeowner occupied properties,
Yeah.
so this doesn't include rental properties.
Residential rental properties are not included?
No, it has to be your primary residence, you're going to get it on one
Do
property.
you know what percentage of the residential base is owner occupied?
I think it's about 70%, around that.
Yeah. Let me just say that the Maryland General Assembly back in 2007 passed a law that required everybody to apply for that homestead credit.
Right.
Because it used to be just automatic, and there was a lot of people who were taking advantage of it, and the state really wasn't paying attention. And that law became...
How are they taking advantage of it?
Well, because they were taking it on their rental property.
Okay.
You know, they lived in their house, they moved to Florida, but still kept their house and rented it out. They didn't bother to tell the state that it was no longer homeowner occupied. And they were getting a much lower assessment.
Yeah, well, it's the only credit that we really have that you'd never really apply for. You just got it automatically on what we assume to be your primary residence. So what we decided to do was to make everybody apply for one property, and we gave everyone a 6-year period in which to do this application, and it ended this past year.
So put it in perspective, in the summer of 2012, of the 60 to 70,000 eligible properties, there were still 30,000 people who hadn't applied for the credit. We put a major push on to identify all those properties and make sure they got letters reminding them that they could potentially have to pay much more in taxes The deadline, and then the legislature extended the deadline for one more year until December 30th, 2013. And what the assessment office has reported to us is of that 70,000 approximately properties, 5,000 of them have not applied. So we were pretty effective in reaching just about everybody, and we sent multiple letters to people, and so if they haven't replied, it's their fault, it's not the State Department's fault. I think the State Department, I have to give them kudos. They made a real strong effort to contact everybody and make sure that they were aware of what the impact would be. Now, many of those 5,000 may be that they weren't eligible for it anyway and they knew it, or it's gone away because of the decline in assessment. And as you can see, and I'll talk about how the gross assessment and the net assessment.
You'll tell us that delta?
Yeah, I'll tell you that delta. Well, I can tell you right now. At the peak, the full cash value of the county was $50 billion, real and personal property, and we had $10 billion of homestead credit, so that our net taxable debt was closer to $40 billion, assessable base, not debt.
So what did that mean in revenue?
It was about $100 million of revenue that was being deferred. And in next year, we're estimating that $10 billion of credit is down to about $700 million of base, which is about $7 million of revenue. So it's fallen by more than 90%, close to 90% since 2010 when it peaked.
Ray, you want to make the point that not all jurisdictions have the same percentage, if you will.
Right.
And that
Well, so for example, and I'll show you this later, how even though our assessable base declined precipitously, our property tax revenue didn't decline nearly as much, although the growth rate slowed, because we were still phasing in credits from people who had a wide difference between their full tax value and their taxable value.
And our neighbors?
Yeah, Montgomery County has a 10% cap, and their revenue grew a lot faster,
Right.
but it also,
Taking a whack on
they
that.
actually had real dramatic declines in their property tax revenues, which is why there was so much more of an impact on Montgomery County's budget during the last crisis in terms of layoffs and service cutbacks.
Who selected for Howard County the 5%?
The county council. That was done about 20 years ago, and the council has the right to reset that every year. They have to do it by, I think, October 30th, so it's set for this next year at 5%.
On the real property, not the personal property, you know what percentage of that is made up by commercial, vis-a-vis the residential, the breakdown? What revenues, what percentage of revenues?
It's about, what is it, Don, I'm trying to remember, it's about 80% residential.
20 commercial.
20, and then 15, and then a small piece of it's agricultural.
Okay.
But it's about 20% resident, 80% residential. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Mine is going to, of course, the reassessments are all subject to appeal, and mine is going to talk about the appeals that we've gotten so far and traditionally.
Why don't you introduce?
This is Maya Archie. She's the Assistant Supervisor of Howard County Assessments. Good morning.
We had 34,000, a little over 34,000 accounts in Group 2, which was just reassessed. We expect a very small percentage of appeals from that group. Typically, we get about 3% of the total assessment area in appeals for the reassessment appeals. The appeals start coming in once notices go out at the end of December. At this point, we haven't gotten a lot of appeals in, thank goodness. To date, we've got about 180 appeals from the reassessment area, which is on par with the last couple of years. We expect to certainly get more in by the deadline, which is February 11th.
Are those residential appeals or all appeals?
Those are all appeals right now, residential and commercial. Typically what happens is we get most of the residential appeals first. They come in at the beginning of the appeal period, and then they start to trickle off. And then the commercial appeals come in at the back end, because most of those appeals are represented by other people, attorneys, and appeal representatives. So they need more time. And also, commercial appeals have the income involved, so there's a lot more work to do, so we usually get those closer to the deadline. But for the most part, the appeals, we get about the same numbers every year. We've gotten less in the last couple of years as values have started to come back a little. But the residential appeals have been going down a little bit. Like I said, we have about 3% of the total number of reassessments in appeals. In addition to the reassessment appeals, we also have petition appeals, which people can file for properties that were not in the reassessment area. So for groups 1 and 3, we also get appeals in those areas. And people have to file those appeals by the end of the calendar year in order for it to be effective for the upcoming July 1.
What allows you to do that?
You just file a form. We have petition
You
forms.
feel your property has declined in value
Yes.
since it was last assessed?
And you've missed the reassessment deadline.
Okay.
So you do have the opportunity to still file an appeal for the upcoming tax year. You have to file a petition for review. We have those forms available on our website. People can also send letters. It's easier for them to just complete the forms and send them in to us.
So when you appeal your home, you're appealing the full cash value that you
Yes.
put on it, right?
Yes, our assessments are based on full cash value.
Could you talk a little bit, I think people would like to know, how you go about assessing a property?
What we do is we take a look at the market. Generally speaking, for residential properties, I'm talking about now. We look at the market, we see what similar types of properties are selling for in particular areas, in the area that we're revaluing for that year. Once we see what the market is showing for values of different types of properties, that gives us the values that we're trying to reach at market value. Then we go out to those properties, we re-inspect those properties to be sure that the information we have in our records is correct. We validate that information, we update our records, we remeasure properties, or we pick up new construction on properties. Anything that has changed on those properties, we make any adjustments to our records to be sure that the sale information that we have regarding the data on the property matches what we have in our records. So once we know that we have accurate information on the properties, then we can revalue the properties based on what the market
But
is
you
showing.
don't know what's inside the house.
We have information on that already initially. We use various sources. We use Maris. We leave cards for the property owners when we're out there, asking them to call us. We go online as much as possible to get information. But the most important information comes from the property owners. We use permits. We use various sources to verify the information. And if we really do need to get specific information about the property, we will do our best to contact the owners and have them provide us with the information.
So I appeal my commercial properties a lot, no offense, but
You're right.
On the residential side, I've never done that. So if I come in with my home and we sit down and you break out the file, do you actually show me 2 or 3 comparable properties you use to set the value of my house? Comparable sales?
If you request comparable sales from us, we will send you a list of comparable sales in your specific neighborhood that we used to come up with the overall values. It's your responsibility as the property owner.
To bring evidence to refute it?
Correct.
Right.
The burden of proof is on the property owner because our values are assumed to be correct. Yes.
Go ahead.
You were mentioning when it transfers, it automatically moves to whatever the new value is. In that case, do you actually use the price it's sold for, or the?
It doesn't automatically move.
The assessment itself doesn't change. The value of the property doesn't change. You're talking about the tax.
So for example, if the house is worth, let's say it's been assessed at $450,000, but because the homeowner has been living in there a long time, it was only being taxed at $400,000. When it's sold the following year, the assessed value goes up to the $450,000, and only then does the credit for increases start to
I
apply
guess my
again.
question is the new assessed value, or is the assessed value based on the sale price, or is it?
No, when prices were dramatically doubling, the assessments didn't automatically come, and you had to wait till that property came around in the cycle again.
I actually
before it was
mean when it comes up for assessment. Do you-
Right.
If it was sold the day before you publish your assessment.
No impact. So a good example, the property in the second area was reassessed this past fall and summer of 2013. That assessment will be effective for fiscal years 15, 16, and 17